Okay. Hi everyone. Thanks for coming to tonight's community session. So tonight's session will be on computer security architecture with Miriam. Miriam, can you introduce yourself and then you can start. Thank you again.
All right, thank you. So as you've heard, my name is Miriam Ondo. I've been in the IT space for a little over 10 years, cut across different functions of IT, starting from network administration, system administration. Then I later on transitioned into cybersecurity and infrastructure management. So today I just want to share some snippets of the knowledge that I have garnered over the years in the different constructs that I've worked in IT. Because for me, what I believe is that information security should not be considered as subsection of IT entirely on its own, but it works best if you bundle it up to the other functions of IT. That will be the network administration, system administration, and things such as just the basic routine management controls within the IT space. So for today's session, it's going to be a marriage between network administration, network security, information security, and then now incident management that now comes into intrusion detection and information recovery. So without further ado, let me get started. For the session, I'd prefer if we first go through the slides. So if you have any questions, kindly note them down, and then we'll take them through at the end of the session.
Thank you. Participants can write their questions in the chat, and then we can.
All right, so the overview of the training today, what I envision covering is common intrusion methods, intrusion detection and response, a little bit on computer forensics, and then an overview of network security, how to configure a secure network, how to manage a secure network, and then now how all these four functions marry into each other. So when you talk about the common network intrusion attacks, there are, the six that I have highlighted are the ones that are most commonly noticed within multiple networks. There are others that have not been mentioned here, but I'll just deal with the most common ones as the title suggests, so that we can know how to identify them, how to respond to them, and how to recover from them. So the first one is usually unauthorized access. This can be either through external people, external factors, or internal factors. So contributors to this include poorly managed networks, poorly configured networks, and then brute force attacks on passwords or social engineering that enable the malicious actors to be able to gain access to your credentials. The next one is man-in-the-middle attacks. This one is usually mostly based off eavesdropping through unsecured communication channels. So again, that will be probably a network that has been set up that has not been encrypted or has been encrypted using weak ciphers. So a person is able to get in the middle of that communication and eavesdrop the packets that are being sent. To some extent, the people are also usually able to manipulate the packets and change. If it's a financial transaction, they can be able to alter it and push a malicious transaction and be able to compromise systems through it as well. The next one is privilege escalation. So this one is going to be over and above the unauthorized access. So a malicious actor has gained access to your network, and then they are able to then provide themselves additional privileges within the network so that they can expand the reach of the breach that they are able to, or the compromise that they're able to push into your network. The next one on distributor is distributed denial of service. So the thing that is common about everything that I'm talking about is this a network intrusion attacks. So my focus for today is on networks, and that is why anything or most of the things that I'm going to be talking about are going to be geared towards intrusions within networks. So that is from the perimeter firewalls into the network and how to maneuver the same. So as I was saying, the next one is distributed denial of service. So most commonly known as a DDoS attack. This one usually occurs when a network is flooded by packets. This could be sync acknowledge packets. So a malicious actor floods your network to a point where, so the default response of any device is usually to try and respond to these packets. So what they'll keep on doing is they'll keep on sending you sync request packets. So these are ideally TCP packets that require the handshake. So they keep on sending you sync requests, you acknowledge, but the more they keep flooding you, it gets to a point where the device, if it's not a smart device or UTM device, which you'll get to later on, it will not be able to respond or protect itself from this type of attacks. So what it does is it keeps on responding up to the point where it crashes and it can no longer be able to respond. And at that point, the malicious actor will have denied your public or your consumers the service because your network will have crashed based off that. Then the next one is code and SQL injection attacks. These ones are more common. These ones do not only affect networks, they also affect application systems. But again, the entry point is on poorly configured networks and being able to push out SQL attacks or code injection through the network. And then the last one, which is the biggest one and most common one, is the insider threats. So these are people who already understand your network. They understand how your network has been configured, and they, for one reason or another, are probably either disgruntled employees or just malicious people who would want to compromise your network or breach your network. So based off the knowledge that they already have in reference to the configuration and how to maneuver through, it makes it easier for them to be able to breach the security or the controls that you have already configured. So now that we understand the most common intrusion mechanisms within networks, so how do we detect intrusions? So the ideal structure of an intrusion detection system architecture, it usually has 4 ideally components. The IDS itself will have 3 components, and then the asset is going to be the 4th component because it is receiving the insights from the IDS. So in a typical IDS, intrusion detection system, we have the agent, we have a director, we have a notifier. And then the asset that is configured to receive these insights gets the notifications from the notifier. So how does the architecture work? In simple terms, an agent, it runs the low-level gathering. So it gathers data from your network. So it could be from things such as signatures. It can be from artificial intelligence, gathering patterns. It can be from various methods based on the intelligence, again, of the IDS system. Most of the ones that are implemented in most organizations are usually pegged on signatures. So they gather the information of what is happening within your network based on signatures that have already been recorded in global systems. Then they match that and then they push that information to the director. So what the director does is it is now able to correlate all this information, and then it is able now to pin out a pattern. So given an instance, maybe it's saying that there's a lot of TCP flood from a single IP. So that could either be a network scan that is being initiated from that IP. So what the agent will do is it will tell it, I'm seeing a lot of requests coming from this IP. And then now the director is supposed to be intelligent enough to know, okay, so it is trying to, I'm still, this scan is coming from this IP, it is to this IP, and ideally what is it trying to do? Is it trying to access the system? No, it's just flooding requests and scanning the network, the entire network. So it's not only scanning this subnet, but it's scanning the whole subnet. So from what the director is able to correlate with the different actions that are done within the network, it then invokes the notifiers. So what the notifiers do is they perform the action. So if we go back to the name of the system, the intrusion detection system, so there has to be an intrusion, and then it should be smart enough to detect this intrusion. So what the notifier does is it acts on behalf of the system and just puts in place a mechanism to be able to either notify you, so that could be pop-ups on your window screen, or for the smarter devices, which will come to them next, they will be able to also put up a wall and prevent the same from going in further. So when it gets to the prevention part, it now transitions from an intrusion detection system to an intrusion prevention system, because it has not only detected it, but has also put in place mechanisms to be able to stop it and to curb the same from being propagated more into the network. So I had mentioned about the data sources a little bit when I was talking about the IDS architecture. So there are two data sources for any IDS system. There's the direct data sources, which is the network packets and system calls. So this is what the agent is able to pick from the network. And then there's the indirect data. So these are the syslog data from the systems, the net flow information, the signatures, the events from other intrusion detection systems. So it's able to correlate all this data, mark patterns, and then be able to respond to an intrusion based off the metric that it has been able to gather. So lastly, on this slide, we talk about the detection modes. So how will an IDS system ideally detect an intrusion? Because that is the work that it needs to do. So the first one is misuse or signature detection. So based off routine signatures that have been updated, it will be able to see that this signature matches what I have, and so I should treat it as an intrusion, and it will block or it will notify the agent, the asset, that this is a potential intrusion within your network. So I'll give an instance of that. So for most firewalls that have intrusion detection functionality, when they see a signature, and I think most people have seen this or have interacted with it, when it sees a signature that matches what it has, it will bring a pop-up for you and tell you that we can note that this file is potentially a malicious file. So you will either acknowledge the alarm and ideally say that it is a false positive. By false positive, meaning that it matches the signature, but it is not a malicious file, or it is actually a positive identification of an intrusion. The next one is an anomaly or statistical detection. So this one is obtained from the patterns that we had talked about that are curated by the director. So again, this is based off data insights that will be propagated from the correlation of patterns that have been able to be detected by the agents from data mining within your assets within the network. So out of this, it is able to curate patterns, and then it knows what is the normal behavior of a network and what is an anomaly or an unusual behavior within the network. So if it sees that all of a sudden, maybe the threshold of this network is usually 100 packets, maybe the TPS of this network is 100 TPS. And so ideally, you will notice that an interface will get between 50 to 90 packets being pushed to this interface. And then all of a sudden, you have a flash of maybe 500 to that interface. Then you definitely know. So out of that, it knows that the norm for this interface is 100 TPS. All of a sudden, it has spiked. So this is abnormal. So then now I need to raise the alarm because this looks like a potential threat. And then the next one is host-based IDS. So host-based is more of tripwire, like instance for tripwire. So where it detects any changes in installed binaries or file activity. So this one is based off things that have already been installed in your network and you are monitoring them. So in the event that there's any change in these binaries of, let's say, applications that have been configured, then when it changes, it raises an alarm for you to be able to look further and assess if it's actually an intrusion detection or it is just probably a legitimate change that was done, probably during patches or updates or anything of that sort. So next, now that we know we have covered our common network attacks, we have seen how an intrusion detection system ideally works as an overview. So how do you respond to an incident? We have been told, or we have noticed that there has been an attack on our network. The IDS has flagged it. So how do we respond to this incident within the network? So there are 4 main phases in incident response. So there's the detection and analysis. This is where you identify the extent of compromise. You identify, so at this point, this is where the IDS will come in. So it will identify the compromise and you will identify the extent of the compromise. And then the next step is the containment, because we have already identified that we have an incident or an intrusion within our network. So we want to contain it so that it cannot be propagated more horizontally or diagonally to our network. So how do we do that? It depends with, number one, the nature of exposure, the type of system that is being exposed, the configuration of your network. But as an overview, what you will do is, again, the first point is dependent on the system. So if you're dealing with a financial system, you will not want to extend the exposure or the risk that you already have. So you would want to reduce the risk of compromise or the risk of the total loss that you will get. So the first thing ideally will be to halt the system, because you want to know, you first want to establish, okay, so we have been compromised. It is a financial system, and you want to know how much in reference to transactions have we lost, or how much, what's the total amount of risk that you're exposed to. Then the next point will be to neutralize the threats. So you would want to identify how they gained access, because for you to be able to contain the incident, you would need to know which gate the intruder used to get into your system, because you have to close that gate so that you can actually be comfortable or provide assurance to your top level management or even to your team that you have contained the incident. So you identify how they gained access, and then you see how they were able to mimic transactions. Again, if this is a financial system, and how they were able to insert it to the system. If it is probably your Active Directory and they were able to escalate privileges, you'd want to walk through the steps in which they were able to gain access. How are they able to gain access? Was it through getting keystrokes from a person's machine? Was it through social engineering, asking someone to reset their password? Was it through eavesdropping or shoulder surfing? They were next to an admin who was keying in their password. So you'd want to know how they were able to get this data so that you can be able to protect yourself and also just close off that backdoor. Then the next one, again, this one is based off if it is a transaction, if it is a financial system, because most of our, I think the trend in IT, there's a lot of, and excuse me for using this word a lot, there's a lot of intermarriage between the financial sector and the technology sector. So, and even in reference to cybersecurity, most people are coming in not only to protect the internet usage and internet as a whole, but also to provide assurance and protect our financial transactions within the fintech space. So another thing that has been hitting heavy on fintech is the regulations that have been coming up. I know most of you are conversant with the Data Protection Act and regulation around payment service providers. So part of the obligations of payment service providers, which are fintechs that provide financial systems to the likes of banks, microfinances, and retail people, they are required by law to report any breach of security within their systems, and also to report what the extent of the breach was. So as part of the containment, you will also need, if it is a financial system, there will be a need to report this to the regulator. So in Kenya's sake, that would be CBK, because the PSPs also fall under CBK, and then the ODPC, the Office of the Data Protection Commissioner. And then the last one, if you are a PSP again, or if you are a person who deals with third parties or end user clients, you are required, again, through the regulation to inform the client. This, number one, is so that they can know that there was a breach in their information, and then they can also be aware of the potential of their information being in the internet, and also just so that they can be wary of what can constitute the breach and how it can affect them. So the next step will be eradication. So we have already contained the incident. Now we want to eradicate it from our network. So this is where ideally you would need to include the presence of forensic investigators. Again, if this is a system that you would need to understand how the malicious people got into your system and what they were able to compromise, because most people usually clean up their tracks once they have come in. So the forensic analysis helps you to identify any underlying patterns, any underlying data that they might have used or systems that they might have used to compromise your system. So through the forensic analysis, you can be able to understand the whole attack pattern and all the data that was compromised, and any ideally if there were systems that were copied into your network and were later deleted as they were trying to clean off their tracks, you would also be able to get this information and understand the incident better. Then the next one will be, you'd also need to capture the relevant logs. This is also going to be pertinent to the forensic analysis that you're going to do, because all that information is what goes into the report when you're doing an analysis of how the malicious actors were able to gain access to your system, what they were able to compromise, at what time, with what access. So all those usually come in when you're doing the investigation and then analysis of everything that went on through the process of the attack. And then lastly, you need to ensure that you do a deep scan on your network so that you can confirm that all the threats that you had identified had been cleared out and you do not have any other backdoor that is still set within your network. And then the post-incident activity would include an after-action report. So the after-action report ideally states the nature of the attack, the sequence, what led up to the events that led up to the attack. It will cover the extent of the exposure, the response action that you put in place, any corrective measures that you found that were gaps that were within your network that made it easier for the malicious actor to gain access, the remediation plan and timelines, all the same, and then also any learnings that you were able to gather out of the event. Then the next one will be to review the report with your executive management, because again, this is a report that is usually consumed by not only your internal stakeholders, but also the external stakeholders. You would need to provide the same report to clients. An instance of the same would be when last year we had the breach with Uber. Everyone wanted to know how it happened, what happened, and what led up to the events. So it is not only an obligation that you hold to the regulator, but also to your clients, so that you can provide them the assurance that you do take security very strongly, and you would want to ensure that you have their backing, because if people do not trust the security controls you put in place on your system, then you will have very disgruntled clients who will then now choose your competitors over you for the services that you offer. Next, we just touch a little bit on cyber forensics. So cyber forensics was part of the eradication process, and here I'll just cover two tools, and I'll cover one more. Just as an overview so that you can just understand what we mean by cyber forensics, how it's done, and what it entails. So just as the title says, the cyber forensics is gathering and analysis of information from a computer device, which will be used as proof of a cyber attack. Why is this relevant? Because this is the information, if you would want to take the case for litigation, that would serve as proof of compromise, and will serve as proof of the person who you are trying to probably sue or trying to push a litigation over. So while security information and event management tools, which are SIEMs, and endpoint detection and response can offer real-time logging. So these are more of the tools that you use within your network to just get the logging information and to understand end-to-end how your system controls have been implemented. The digital forensic systems specialize in investigation of IT systems in the context of security events. So the SIEM and the endpoint detection response systems will provide information that will also go into the cyber forensics, because you will use these logs to be able to identify and to investigate the events that happened within your IT systems that led to a compromise. So then, what are the steps that are followed when you're running a cyber forensics? The first thing will be to make a digital copy of the data. This is very important because, again, when you go back to the common network attacks, and this is also a preset for cybersecurity and is very well known. The greatest link and the greatest weakest point in cybersecurity is the people. So whether it is the internal people or external people, people are usually the greatest link, the greatest weakest link, because they will either be social engineered or you'll have a disgruntled employee. So making the digital copy ensures that even if someone goes ahead and destroys this system, destroys this drive, or tries to format it, you will have a copy of that specific drive or that specific network that you're supposed to investigate. And also in the process of investigation, in the event that you run an investigation and probably you compromise the data, you can now go back to the copy and then make another copy and now start the investigation afresh. So it gives you a fallback plan when you're running your investigation. So once you take the digital copy, you have to ensure and authenticate that it is actually the right copy and it is what should be investigated. Again, it just goes back to trusting people. You have to ensure that you do everything to confirm that the data has not been compromised, or the drive or the system that you're trying to investigate has not been compromised, or there is no cover-up that is being done on that information. Because remember, this whatever you're going to provide at the end of the day as your report is going to be used to litigate someone, probably in a court of law, or to push for compensation of some sort. So it has to be information that is reliable and can be trusted. Then the next one is you have to ensure that no data has changed. Again, just going back to the process of ensuring that you make a digital copy and you authenticate it. Then next, you would now in the process, the next three are as part of the process of the cyber forensics analysis. So you would want to recover any deleted files that were deleted during the attack, and you would also want to track the changes to their root. So using the DFS systems, you can be able to recover data that was deleted during the process when a person was covering up their tracks. That is what DFS tools are usually revered for. Even if you delete your data or you format a disk, if you're using a DFS tool, you can be able to reclaim this data, and you can be able to understand the patterns and roll back and track back to where the event started and how they were able to maneuver through the system and through the drive, and you'll be able to pick up the pattern of how the attack was propagated. Then the next one is to use keywords when you're searching for the data. This will also help you to be able to identify the pattern of attack by the malicious intruder. And then lastly, as always, for any investigation that is being done, you need to create a report, and the report has to also include your working papers and evidence of all this and screenshots so that it can be used to validate the process that you have just gone through. So I'll go a little bit deeper into autopsy. For most of these digital forensic systems, they are very easy to use, and they actually usually have graphical user interfaces. The two that I have mentioned, Kane and Autopsy, the sleuth kit, they are both open source tools. So you can be able to go play around with it and see what you're able to get out of these insights. So the first thing that you'd want to do, so just as an overview, Autopsy analyzes major file systems by hashing all the files and unpacking the standards. And then after that, you can now use the keywords to search for the indexed files and for the recent activity within your system. And then you can be able to generate a report that summarizes the important activity within the drives. So below, I have highlighted the steps. So the first thing is you'd want to make a copy of your drive. And then the next step is you will have a computer that already has Autopsy configured on it. It's a graphical user interface system, so it is very easy to use. So once you have the Autopsy configured on your device, you'd want to start it up. Again, it's an application program. So you start it up and then you load the drive that you want to scan. So because you have created an image file, so ideally you load the image file to Autopsy. So once you load the image file, you'll give it some time to scan. So depending on the size of the image, it can be a pretty quick scan. It can be a scan that goes for a week. So once it scans, it will be able to also, as I mentioned, it will be able to get back deleted data. You can be able to recover deleted data. And then after it has finished the scan, you can push it to a centralized repository. Autopsy can be able to create for you a centralized repository. Then you can be able to search for the keywords on the repository. And then now from that, you can be able to now see the patterns or see how, identify how the attack was started. And then now walk through with the different, as you're searching for the keywords, you can be able to identify now the patterns of how this person propagated the attack within the network. So Autopsy is very easy to use. It does not have pop-ups messages for any data that has been recovered. It pushes it all to repository, a centralized repository. Then you can use the keywords to search for patterns or to be able to identify how the attack was propagated. So now, as an overview of network security, because it's important for us to understand how a secure network is configured. Now that we know the common intrusion detection patterns, we know how to identify an intrusion, we know how to respond to one, and we have even done an overview of ideally cyber forensic investigation, just an overview. So we'd also, now that we have learned all that, we would need to understand what constitutes a secure network and how can you ensure that your network is secure. So when you talk about network security, there are three main things that I usually mention in all networks when you talk about security and configuring secure networks. So there is the segmentation of a network, there's the security domains of a network, and then there's the connectivity of a network. So the reason why I've mentioned, I'll go step by step for all of them so that we can understand why they are important aspects that need to be configured within your network. So when you talk about segmentation, just think of it as the abacus. It's you create layers, and these layers represent different things. So just as it is, the network segmentation, it divides your network into smaller sub-networks. And through this, you're able to assign different roles and responsibilities according to what is authorized and acceptable for that segment. Then we have the security domains. So security domains, through a security domain, you're able to segregate your network. So you can create a domain for specific functions or specific people. So let me first get into the first two, so that we can be able to identify how these two are different. So let's say I own an organization XYZ, and this organization XYZ provides financial services or a financial application to the retail clients, so that is everyone. So I would want to ensure that, number one, there is segregation between my production and my local environment. So I'd want my users to have their own domain where they can be authenticated with an Active Directory for the core functions, the core systems that they use. So the likes of printers, the likes of local servers, the likes of maybe TFS or a Git that they're using for source code management. So that would be authenticated and managed in the local network. And then I'd want a production network that only facilitates production servers and through which I can only have a security domain for production servers that does not integrate to the local domain. So what it does is it provides me assurance that if I have a compromise within my local network, it will not be propagated to my production network because these two domains are separate. So when I talk about segmentation, within my production network, I will have a DMZ layer, I will have an internal layer, and then I'll have probably a DB layer. Depending on the functions, I can have another segregated network. If I have maybe card data, I can have a PCI layer. So the different layers ideally just segment the network so that for the DMZ, these are servers that interact with the internet, and they are at a higher risk of compromise because they interface with the perimeter firewalls. And then I have the internal layer, which is air-gapped. It does not have access to the internet, but has an interaction with servers that are within the DMZ layer. And then I can have a database layer, which is more secure, has more policies and processes configured to ensure that it is only number one accessed by the application servers. And then also in the event of a compromise, we have these other layers before you're able to reach the database layer. Then the connectivity, the reason why I mentioned the VPN is because this is one of the very most common uses of network security. So a VPN is a virtual private network. Ideally, a virtual private network is a connection between two endpoints, a server and a client, that is established over the internet but uses an encrypted tunnel. So there are two types of VPNs ideally. There is the most common VPNs that most people use for, how would I say, protecting their identity or providing assumption that they are in one place yet they're in another place, most commonly used for streaming sites and things like that, or online writing. So those ones would probably or most commonly use SSL VPN tunneling. So that is certificate based. And then we have the most serious VPNs, which are used for systems, financial systems, I'd say connectivity between endpoints and firewalls. So these are IPsec VPNs. So IPsec VPNs, in full, it is IP security VPNs. So IP security VPNs are a more secure type of VPN. They comprise of two distinct phases. There is the phase one for the gateway connection. I'd say gateway. So that is the public IP of the server and the public IP of, so if, again, sorry to mumble, but there are different types of IPsec VPN. There is the site to site, and then so a site to site ideally is a server to server connection. So we'll have the public IP for site one and public IP for site two. So these two sites agree on a connection, and they have something called a private, a PSK, which is a private key that is exchanged between these two and only these two sites. So what that PSK does is it provides assurance that I only know. So let's say it is a VPN between Miriam's site and Maria's site. So Miriam knows that she has only shared this PSK with Maria, and Maria knows it is only Miriam who knows of this PSK. So it provides the assurance that this tunnel can only be used by these two people. So over and above that, there is the encryption that is enforced within that tunnel. So encryption is enforced on both phase one and phase two. So for phase one, it is the key negotiation between the two sides, and then the encryption between the two sides. And then on phase two, which is now on the access list permissions. So phase two, we detail the access list of the endpoints that are going to be accessed by both sites. And then we also detail the encryption that is going to be used and the hashing that is going to be used over the tunnel. So why IPsec VPNs are more secure is because number one, they have the PSK that is exchanged between the two tunnels, that confirms that it is only this person and this person who have this tunnel. Best practice usually dictates that these PSKs are shared through private channels. So that will be the network administrator of site 1 sharing it to the network administrator of site 2. They cannot be shared over email because that is not a private channel. So ideally over messages or phone call, that would be the ideal scenario. And then the second thing is that it has encryption on 2 layers. It has encryption on the public layer of the peer IP and peer IP, that is the public IP of the gateway A and public IP of gateway B. And then over and above that, it also has encryption of the end-to-end traffic between the endpoint that is seated underneath site A and the endpoint seated underneath site B. Yeah. So the next screen is just an overview of what will constitute a secure network. So it is just a makeshift network, just an overview so that we can grasp the different things that I've talked about and how they get into and are configured within a network. So ideally, we'll have the internet at the top, and then we'll have a HQ, which is the headquarters in the DR site. So ideally for all networks, it is really best practice to have a redundant disaster recovery sites that in the event that you have any issues within your headquarters, you can be able to fail over to your DR site. So ideally for the perimeter firewall, we usually recommend that you have 2 firewalls, an external facing firewall, which is usually termed as an egress firewall. It inspects all the traffic that is incoming from the internet and going into the internet. And then you have an internal firewall that sits behind the external firewall. The reason behind this is because the external firewall will protect you from any attacks coming from the internet. It will also configure all your VPNs from the internet into the network, because remember, VPN is just a private network. So it's a private channel that has been configured over the internet. It still uses the internet, but it's just a point to, ideally a point A to point B connection that is trusted between point A and point B, still over the internet, but encrypted, so that people cannot eavesdrop on your communication. So the internal firewall is usually more detailed. It will have your policies. It will have things like application whitelisting, port whitelisting, so that so how a VPN usually works is you will have let's say IP x.x.x.x is allowed to communicate to IP y.y.y.y in site B. So the internal firewall, why it is important is it enables you to narrow down this policy to a port specific and system specific and protocol specific policy. So rather than just having it wide as this IP address has access to this IP address, you can be able to narrow it down to a level of saying this IP address from site A can only communicate to this IP address on site B using HTTPS protocol for service X. So again, what we're trying to do is to be able to reduce the risk to an acceptable level. So the public or the external firewall says, I have this VPN between site A and site B. Over and above the VPN between site A and site B, I have this success list that says this IP address from site A can communicate to this IP address in site B. What the internal firewall comes to do is it says, hold up, okay, Sawa, you have said you have this IP address in site A that communicates this IP address in site B. But how can we even secure this communication further? Can we specify the protocol? Yes, we can. So rather than allowing everything, let's only allow HTTPS or SFTP or then and then over and above that, rather than just configuring a protocol, can we specify which application it accesses? So let's say you have an SFTP application on that port. You can whitelist that port and you can whitelist that application. And then just to add on to that, it also specifies the port that it can be able to access. You can even go a step further to say if the application on site A uses definitive static port, that means the port does not change every single time it is trying to access a service on site B, then you can even specify that I want this IP address to only come in with this protocol through this port to this application. So the internal firewall makes you, it drills down the security of this tunnel or the communication between these two sites to an even grainier level. So once you get into the internal firewall, then we go to a core switch. So a core switch ideally enables you to configure the different segments within your network. So that is probably where you'll have your VLANs configured. We also have unified threat modeling firewall that are smart enough to be able to not only act as a perimeter firewall, they also act as network segmenting tools. They also have IDS and IPS protection. So there are some networks where you would find the VLAN configuration and segmentation, the virtual domains configured on the firewalls, because nowadays we have firewalls that are smart enough to be able to allow you to do that. So then you will see that there's the segmentation of the network. We have the DMZ layer at the very top. So that we have mentioned is anything that interfaces or touches the internet. They would ideally have public IPs configured or domains mapped out to services that are seated there. So these are services that are accessible over the internet and will need to be published to the internet. And then we have an internal layer where we have most of our physical or our server farm or our internal services, application servers seated. So depending on the network, you would have some people preferring to just have physical servers, as was the traditional system. There are people nowadays are going towards virtualization. So that is what is depicted on my network diagram. We have physical servers that have a hypervisor. So what a hypervisor does is it enables you to be able to create virtual machines on your physical servers, depending on the resources that you have. So for my network diagram, we have virtualization and then we have containerization. Those are not essential things that we will need to kick in during this session. Probably it will be another session, but it's just an overview of an example network setup. So the containerization is through Kubernetes, and then we have the master node, and then we have the worker nodes for the orchestration of the containers. And then we have the lower layer, which is the database layer. For the database layer, we have a primary database, we have a replica database, and then we have an archival server. So the thing that is consistent in the diagram, number one, is just trying to ensure that we have high availability setup. So that is why we have the virtualization and containerization, because high availability, what is just the principle behind high availability is you being able to recover in the event of a disaster. So you have multiple systems being able to provide the same function. And the same is cut across to the database layer. And in essence, also, the reason why we also try and push for 2 firewalls is also for the high availability. In the event one fails, you still have a failover with the second firewall. So high availability should not only be in reference to the system infrastructure, but also the network infrastructure, because incidents occur at any point within your network. Right, and then we have the layer for the replication between your HQ and your DR, because ideally, if it is a disaster recovery environment, there has to be replication of data from HQ to DR. And then we have the VPN connectivity for the end users who would be seated on a separate domain. So we have a jump server. What the jump server is used for is ideally to manage connections. So rather than people connecting directly from the end machines to servers, you have a jump server through which you're able to manage connections, and you're also able to pull the different resources into managed groups and now provide access based on the groups and responsibilities to the different functions within the production instance. So the next slide is just an overview of the network composition and what systems or tools will be needed for a secure network. So I try to summarize this into 4 different constructs. So we have the firewall, which would mention the perimeter devices. So we have an external firewall and an internal firewall. So what we would have within the firewall, we would have the configuration of our VPNs, configuration of our virtual LANs, configuration of our virtual domains. So that is if you have different services being offered within your network and you would want to segregate them either according to the client or according to the service, you can be able to create a virtual domain. And then now under the virtual domain, you can create a virtual LAN. So the virtual LAN would ideally sit squarely or hand in hand with the segmentation. So let's say for, let me just go back. So for the DMZ layer, it would be in its own VLAN, and then the internal layer will be in its own VLAN, and then the DB layer will be in its own VLAN. So if you're having different services that would be required to be segmented, then you can have two separate virtual domains. So let's say you have financial systems for your accounting team, and then you have a leave management system for the entire organization. So you can have a virtual domain for the leave management where people, everyone within that virtual domain, which would ideally be everyone within the organization would have access to that. And then you can be able to segment that virtual domain dependent on if your leave management system has internet access. You'd have a VLAN for the DMZ layer, a VLAN for internal layer, and a VLAN for the DB layer. Then you can have a more segregated and secure virtual domain that can only be accessed by specific people within your environment, and it will be authenticated using a different Active Directory or a different mechanism. So again, also for that virtual domain, you will have a VLAN for internal, a VLAN for DMZ, and a VLAN for the DB layer. Then the access lists come in when you're configuring the VPN. As I mentioned, the IPsec VPNs have 2 phases. They have the phase 1 for the peer negotiation and the PSK negotiation, and then they have phase 2 for access lists and NAT configuration. So the access list and NAT come in phase 2, where you are able to define which IPs should have access to which IPs. And then for the NAT configuration, this can be either internal or external NAT. So when you talk about NAT, we're talking about network address translation. So this can be used in 2 ways. It can be used to mask the IPs if you do not want your the person who you're connecting to know your network. The reason behind this, again, is just to increase the security of your network. If you tell people the makeup of your network, again, if they're able to compromise your network, it will be very easy for them to launch a horizontal attack or to be able to continue propagating the attack. But if you give them a NATed IP, which ideally is like a shadow IP of what is actually seated within your network, even if they have access to it, they will not be able to determine what are the other IP addresses that are within your network. Then pegged to perimeter devices, which are the firewall, we have the access management. So how do we manage access? That is on the left, so top left. How do we manage access within the network? We have the Active Directory. Sorry, I repeated that. There's the Active Directory, and then there's the network access control. So the Active Directory would ideally have the users defined within your domain and the groups that they belong to and what resources they're able to access. Then we have the network access controls. What a network access control is, it enables you to configure ports within your network. So you can be able to control which port has access to what detail. And this is especially important when you own the building, because nowadays there are a lot of someone can be able to just get into your building, and if there's a free port, they can be able to plug in their machines using an internet cable, and then from that they can be able to run a scan. Then that is how they start now getting access to your network, and then God forbid, there is a system that uses an encrypted traffic that will be a HTTP call, they can be able to gain access to that system and be able to get access to those credentials, and then that is how they're able to ideally escalate their privileges and gain access to other systems. So an NAC tool is very important because it will help you to be able to curtail these unmanaged ports, network ports, and to also help you to be able to manage the network ports according to the roles and responsibility of the people within your network. Then on the bottom left, we have access management on a system level. So we have the privileged access management tools and we have the database access management tools. These two tools perform typically similar functions, but in different levels. The privileged access management tool is for privileged systems where you need accountability and responsibility for actions performed by privileged users. So this will be systems that are very sensitive. And however, you will need people to do the change management, patching, and all that. So any single time that they would want to do any change of the system, we have tools that have been created to assist us in managing these types of changes. So what the PAM tool will do is it will give them a time-based access and a one-time access. So once you've been given that access, you cannot be able to use it. And then the other thing that most PAM tools now are able to do is they're also able to record that session. So that now, as the IT manager or the person in charge of access management within that organization, you can be able to validate that the access that I gave Miriam, she actually performed the functions that were detailed within the change management process and did not veer from what had been assigned to her. And then we have the database access management. So this is geared towards database access. So for, again, the database, there's usually routine maintenance management of the database tables, and you will also still need a way over and above the audit and logging that is available on your database tools. You will need a way in which you can manage the privileged users in the database. So the DAM, again, does the same thing. It provides one a time-based or one-off access to the database administrator to enable them to perform the function that they need to perform. And again, you can be able to get logs tracked of all the functions that they performed using this access that you are able to provide to them. Then we move to intrusion detection. So this was what we had covered mostly on the session today. So at the top right, we have intrusion detection systems, intrusion prevention system, and antivirus system. So as you mentioned, intrusion detection system will just alert you when they see something that is similar to an intrusion. It will be able to either notify you. Nowadays, IDS systems have been, again, merging into antiviruses. So they can be able to identify, notify you, and also put in place measures to block the intrusion. And then an IPS system, what an IPS system does is ideally it prevents the intrusion from being able to propagate itself within the network. So it will not only identify it, it will also block it and also clean it from your network. A good example for, again, as I mentioned, some of these things can be single systems. I'm trying to look for the right one. They can be segregated systems, but with the advancement of technology, most of these things are also bundled up in firewall technologies. So I'll give you an instance of an IDS and IPS solution. For most commonly used firewall, I think, is a FortiGate. So for the FortiGate, these functions come as additional services within the firewall itself. So you can be able to put on IDS and IPS. So when you put on IDS, it will be able to, again, get the insights from the firewall agent, push it to the director for pattern analysis, and then push it to the notifier so that when it sees anything that is similar to number one, the signatures it gets number two, the patterns it has been able to learn, it can be able to protect your network. So it can be as simple as the firewall seeing that public IP. I'll refer to a recent attack that was being propagated on Linux system, known as Zordidos, or headless or Chinese chicken. So what it was doing is it was DDoS attack that is pegged on Linux ports that are open. So it will first scan your network, see if there's any port that is open, ideally SSH ports. And then what it does then is it just pushes, it floods your network with sync requests. So firewalls that are not smart ideally will keep on trying to respond to it up till the point where it gives up and just flashes out the network, and it goes off. And at that point, you're not able to provide services to your public users. What smart firewalls and UTM firewalls currently are doing, or how they react to such instances, is number one, once it notices that there's a lot of floods coming in from that IP, it will either block it, or it will put the firewall into a fail-safe mode. So by putting it into a fail-safe mode, it ideally blocks any traffic that is coming from the public, but it does not kill your network. So what that allows you to do is, once that happens, number one, it has not impacted the internal services. So you can be able to just go back, see that this public IP is what was pushing this unsolicited packets, and you can be able to block it and reclaim your network. So that is an example of how IDS and IPS work in a firewall system. And then at the bottom right, we have the intrusion detection, but now internal systems that assist you in intrusion detection and log management. So we have the security incident and event management tool. We have a digital forensic system, and we have vulnerability scanners. So the reason why these are also important is because based off this, you can be able to learn the patterns within your network, be able to identify potential threats as they come. You can be able to identify the threat landscape, especially for SIEM tools that are interconnected to the internet. Example will be Alien Vault or Security Onion. And then for vulnerability scanners, you can be able to scan your network to establish if it has any vulnerabilities, because any network that has vulnerabilities is compromisable. So that has to be a reiterative process, that you scan, remediate, because vulnerabilities are coming out every single day, and every single day we need to patch and fix our systems. And then now, because these are a lot of systems, there has to be a way in which you manage your logs, because all these systems push out logs, and all these systems, all the logs that are pushed out by these systems have to be ingested by a person or a team, which will be the security center, the SOC center. And then based off these systems and these alarms, they can be able to note if there's a pattern or something that needs to be investigated, or if there's something that needs to be escalated. So there are various ways in which you can manage your logs. What I took for this instance will be the Elk Suite, Elastic Log Search, and Kibana, because it enables you to visualize and break down your logs and be able to consume them in a manner in which that you can be able to interpret them and see patterns coming from them. So at this point, because the focus is on securing your networks, does it mean if your network is secure that your system is secure? A very rhetorical question. No. So as much as you have secured your network, you have to put in place or understand that there are other aspects that contribute to the overall security of your network and the overall security of your systems. So number one, endpoint attack. So this one is based off the end user machine. So we took up network security as an overview pegged on how you configure your network, from the perimeter firewalls to the segmentation, segregation, domains, virtual connections, and all that. But over and above that, we have the assets that are configured within your network. So are you reviewing the security of these assets? Are you doing malware scans on them? Do they have antiviruses configured? Are you doing awareness training for your users? Again, the weakest link is the people. So you need to ensure they are trained continuously every single time and every chance that you get. The next one is on malware attacks. Are you scanning your systems to confirm that they're not infected? You run a scan on your networks to ensure that you don't have any attacks that are going uncompromised. And then vulnerability management. Are you managing the vulnerabilities on your assets? Are you checking if you're using the software that are legitimate? Are you using software that has reached end of life that is no longer being managed with the patches? Are you reviewing the access within your network? Are you doing simple things such as just recertification of users within your network? So that brings us to the next slide of key security considerations that you need to also consider when looking at network security. So system security now will also encompass the application security, the API security, backend infrastructure, and all that. So what would you ideally also want to look at? For application security, you want to look at the encryption communication. So you want to ensure that you use HTTPS for all communication. You want to ensure that all your applications are using TLS 1.2 to communicate within application components. This is what you can via a way or protect against man-in-the-middle attacks. You want to ensure that all your applications are hosted on secure backend infrastructure. So how are you configuring your infrastructure? Are you using the CIS hardening standards to ensure that you have hardened your infrastructure against any compromise? Have you done vulnerability assessments on your infrastructure to ensure that you have sealed down on any potential weak spots? The next one is on key generation and key exchange. Are you using encrypted, strong encryption mechanisms and ciphers for communication within your application components? The next one is on session management. Are you employing session filters? Are you having tokens for sessions? Are you monitoring your sessions? Are you timing your sessions? Because again, if a person is able to gain access to if you're not managing your sessions, then that means a person can be able to gain access to it and can be able to compromise the session and then launch attack based on the session. The next one will be API security. Are you authenticating your APIs? There are various ways in which you can authenticate your APIs. You can use the public key infrastructure. You can use defined passwords and usernames. But it is always important to ensure that your API has security enforced. How, again, goes back to the backend infrastructure and hosting. Are the APIs being exposed to the public? If they are they using are they authenticated endpoints? Are they being accessed over HTTPS? Then there's the user validation for account controls. Are you using Active Directory for validation of users within your network? Is there network access whitelisting? That this does not only need to be through the NAC tool, it can also be through the firewall. You can just configure basic rules saying person X is in IT and this person X can only access these applications on this port using this protocol. Backend infrastructure, you're doing the vulnerability and penetration testing on your infrastructure to just ensure that you are running a secure environment. Yeah, and with that, we get to the end of our session. At this point, I'll take any questions that you may have.
Miriam, I'd say hi, how are you? So I was gonna say someone has just said on chat that may God protect you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for this. This was really nice. Thank you so much. And I didn't join early, but I joined a little bit late, but I really enjoyed it. Awesome. Maybe I can let Maria take it up from here.
Okay, thanks, Eve.
Thank you. It was really nice.
So someone asked if you'll be sharing the presentation. And
yes, I'll share it with Maria.
Oh, thank you. I will yeah, I'll figure out how to go about sharing it with the community. Another one asked, network segmentation ties into defense in depth too, but that's a comment. Other than that, there are no questions. Just compliments in the chat box. So I think that's fine.
I'm happy I was clear.
Yes, I think you are very clear. We got some comments that they really enjoyed the session, and I really enjoyed how you used real life examples when you're explaining certain concepts. Christine Wambiru asked, if you have an organization that has branches around, how do you go about network security?
Okay, I think I can cover this in a different way. So especially for branches, when you're looking at network security, you want to ensure that you can be able to validate the access from the branches. The other thing that you would want to look at is the mode of connectivity between your branches and your headquarters. So the example again I'll take probably is, I think the most common one, which will be banks. So number one, in reference to your network, you can either install an SD-WAN. So ideally, what it will be is it's just a larger scale of a WAN that has been configured that ensures that all the traffic that is within that network, regardless of where the branch is coming from, is simulated as if it is in the same network. So the advantages of an SD-WAN ideally would be the additional security that is on it, because as much as it is an extended network, it is secured to only be accessed by the organization and its branches. Another alternative to use would be an MPLS connection, a secure MPLS connection, because the first thing that you'd want to establish is how are your branches interconnected. You would want them to be interconnected in the most secure way first that is available. So either an MPLS or an SD-WAN. An IPsec VPN is a very good third contender, but it is pegged on the geographical other geographical functions, because remember, a VPN, unlike the SD-WAN and MPLS, which is through fiber, would be over the internet. So it is dependent on the quality of link. It is dependent on things such as weather. So you would want, that could be a third contender, but ideally the other two would be the ones that you would go by. So if you're employing an MPLS or an SD-WAN, the goal is to make this entire organization or the entire network to work as one unit. So then that would mean all the systems that are being accessed ideally are accessed from HQ. Again, it goes back to the likes of your Active Directory, your Radia servers. You would want to centralize the management so that you can have the same place to ideally provision the access or deprovision the access. I had mentioned a few of the tools that you'd want to have on your network. I think that is pretty standard, because for the branches, regardless of you having the branches, the system being accessed is the same one. So you'd want to have a PAM for the privileged access use. You'd want to have a DAM for the database access. You'd want to have a SIM so that you can be ahead of time in reference to your threat landscape, in reference to activities that are being done within your network. But I think the first thing would be establish what the need of the organization is. Is it fast and reliable connection and secure? Then based off of that, pick a connection mode, and then ensure that all your systems are centralized, and then now employ the different controls in place. So the segmentation of your network, it works as one. User access management, vulnerability assessment of the entire network, ensuring all end users have antiviruses, ensuring that the network access control is enforced even for the branches, because that will be very important for you to be able to have visibility of what is being done on the branches. And then also ensure that all the branches have firewalls running, not just antiviruses, but also firewalls. And if you can have a UTM device, the better, because they are smart enough to not only identify intrusions, but also protect and react to intrusions within your network. Yeah. I hope that was clear. Christine?
She is commenting in the chat. She said, thank you very much. That was clear. Someone else asked, regarding incident response, do you recommend reporting all the incidents to the regulators, or it depends with the severity of the incident?
It depends with, number one, the organization, because again, it is not all organizations that are mandated to report these breaches to regulators. And then it depends with the incident as well. Sometimes you might assume that it is not important for you to report an incident, but let me go back to like the ones who are regulated and are required to report incidences. So I'll give an example of the payment service providers, because that is a landscape that I have worked very closely with. So for payment service providers, regardless of if the incident has contributed to financial loss or not, you are required to report it. The reason behind this is because you might think it is a small incident, but in hindsight, it can cascade into something else. So yes, you would be mandated to report a security incident, especially if it touches on your production network. If it is an incident that touches on your internal network that does not interface with the production network for the services that you offer to your clients, there might be a caveat there. But if it is anything that directly impacts the services that you are providing to your clients, then whether small or large, you would need to report it to the regulator. And then also for these things, CBK is very open with its regulations. You can just go to the CBK guidelines. You can have a view of the PSP guidelines and obligations. There's a whole guidance note on PSPs, both for cybersecurity and PSP. There's a guidance note on PSPs, and there's a guidance note on cybersecurity for PSPs. So if there's anything that is not clear, any point that is not clear to you, you can always go into the CBK material and just get it. They are it is there for everyone. I hope that's clear, Evelyn.
Yes, she said, thanks so much for the presentation and clarification. And then Purity asked regarding, okay, I cannot pronounce this.
SD1.
Yes, between Cisco and Fortinet, which one would you recommend?
I think it's pegged on preference of users. I think this one is a hard nut. There are Cisco diehards, there are Fortinet diehards. I have used both. Fortinet is easier to use because it has the graphical user interface. Cisco also has a graphical user interface, but Fortinet is more user friendly. That does not remove from the functionality that Cisco is able to deliver to you. So I think it is just based off the preference of users, because traditionally most people have been veering towards Cisco because that is what we were all introduced to at first. With the CCNA, the routers, the switches, everything was Cisco. And then FortiGate gradually got introduced to the market, but FortiGate, remember, is a UTM firewall. Okay, so Cisco has other devices and other functionalities. So it has the ASA firewalls, it has the Cisco routers, depending on your reach and the type of security you want on your network. It has the core switches, but FortiGate ideally focuses more on the unified threat management firewalls, which enable you to it enables you to have the functionality of a router, switch, and firewall all in one, rather than segmenting the same. So I think this is a question based off your network needs, expertise that you have, and then again, I think it is just a personal preference for everyone. So everyone will have a different correspondence to that purity.
Okay, thank you, Miriam. I think that has answered that question. I think we can close off the session now, if everyone is okay with that. Can you help close off the session, please?
Thank you so much. Miriam. Thank you, everyone. And back to you, Miriam. I think you wanted to say something.
No, I just want to say thank you. Thank you so much. I think thank you for the questions. It's been an engaging session, and I hope to be back with Shihaks if even Maria give me an opportunity.
More than welcome any day for that one.
All right. Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Miriam. Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thanks.
Thank you.